Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Decode Strategy livestream. It's the Asia's hottest online classroom for marketing professionals from marketing professionals. And we have a very, very special guest today. So I don't want to spend much time in the introduction. So I'll quickly tell you a little bit about myself, about the company and this whole initiative. And then we'll move on to speak to our speaker for today. So I started this company called Decode Strategy Labs almost a year ago. And there are basically two things which I do. On one side, I consult directly with brands on marketing related requirements. And on the other side, I also provide an online course on strategic marketing. It's a part of the whole educational side of my business. And as a part of this same educational side, I also try and provide a lot of videos on my YouTube channel, so you can go and check out. The link is there in the event page. And these live streams where we have all these experts, extremely senior people from the industry, is also a part of the education side of my business. So do take go visit the website, take a look at the YouTube page. There is a lot of content. There are a lot of great speakers who've joined me on this live stream, so you will have a good time learning. Just a quick note, there's a beautiful event that is coming up, and if you haven't registered or you want to register, you should do that. I'll drop a link in the event page. We've got Carlijn Postma joining us from Netherlands, and she's the author of the book Binge Marketing. She's also a person who owns and runs her own agency, her own content agency. And this book is something really interesting because she's taken the concept of storytelling and content development in Hollywood and turned it into, lessons for marketing professionals. And then now she applies that into her own business. So this is going to be a very, very fun session. So make sure you register so that you get a notification for that event. And there's a ton of hard work that goes into this whole process behind the scenes, and it's hard to know and it's hard to appreciate. So the small gesture that you can do is you can follow the page on LinkedIn, the Decode Strategy Labs page on LinkedIn, so that you can stay updated. And you can also subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you like what you're seeing here today, just take the link of the video, just take the link of the content and share it with your friends. Pass it forward, give others an opportunity to learn and discover a space for really good learning to happen. And lastly, if there's a speaker or a topic, or if you're someone with a lot of experience in the industry and you would want to be a part of this live stream, feel free to reach out. Let's have a conversation. You can email me on hello@decodestrategy.com, and we can take it up from there. So on that note, I will be adding Siddharth, who is the Managing Director and Senior Vice President, India and Asia at Pearson. Just give me a second. Hello, Siddharth. Welcome to the Decode Strategy livestream. It's really, really, really great that we could finally do this. I think we've been talking about it for over a month and a half, or almost 2 months now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Awesome.
Thank you for having me here, Rahul. And it's so coincidental that you are having me here and we're talking about learning and hyper-learning on a weekend where I've actually come back to the place and the city where it all began for me, which is my own parents' house in Lucknow.
Okay.
I'm kind of retracing over this weekend, over this Saturday and Sunday, I'm retracing all my learning journeys in a way. My preschool, my school, my parents, my brother, my friends, all of us in Lucknow who contributed to the formative years of who I am today. So it's very, very coincidental and a privilege to be talking about learning in that context over this weekend.
Right. Awesome. So my introduction to you was, because of the book that you had written, 52 Red Pills, and we'll be, I would love to know more about that book as well. But there are a lot of people who are watching this live stream and who will be watching the recording in future as well. So for the sake of them, I would just want you to quickly just tell us a little bit about your journey, your corporate journey, your professional journey, and then we'll, kind of move on to the questions from there. A quick overview, and then we'll kind of, get into the details from there.
Sure, Rahul. And like I said, since I am a little bit on the nostalgia trip over this weekend, this Saturday and Sunday, I can actually provide a quick flashback into
Yeah.
how my life journey has been.
Yeah.
And that's really the nub of anyone who's tuned in, whether it's tuned in from India or tuned in from Asia Pacific. I think the whole point is it's not about a professional journey, it's about a life journey. And that
Right.
life journey feeds back into your professional journey.
Right.
So I grew up and I was born in Lucknow, which is a city in northern India. That's where I did my entire schooling. Lamatnia College, for those of you who in India who are tuned in, that
Yeah.
was my kind of formative 12 years, my core experience of being a person, my own person, as it were.
Right. Right.
Went on to Delhi, did my bachelor's in economics, did my MBA, and then joined the corporate world, if you may, in 2000. So we were the millennium batch graduating
Right.
out of our MBA batch from FMS.
Right.
And then for the first 15 years of my career, I spent time learning and absorbing the world of consumer goods, or FMCG, or CPG as we know it.
Yeah.
And most of those 15 years were with Unilever, which has been my school and my college and my university, both
Right.
for learning business as well as for learning about people and leadership. So that's
Right.
really where I kind of grew up as a professional and as a business leader in the
Right.
first 15 years of my career.
Right.
I then wanted to get progressively more and more into the digital world, into the world
Right.
where our consumers, where all of us have actually got into in very many different ways across very many different behaviors that we exhibit on a daily
Right.
basis. So from Unilever, I moved to Vodafone, where I was heading up our marketing efforts for Vodafone for a number of years. I moved to Facebook, where I was running revenue and monetization for a large part of our business in India. Till recently, I was with Games 24/7 running and revenue and marketing monetization efforts
Right.
for Games 24/7, which is a gaming startup. And I have very recently joined Pearson to head up our charter for India and for higher education in Asia. So I think it's been a fantastic journey over the last 21 years. I have learned
Right.
quite a lot. I have met people who have taught me quite a lot. I
Right.
have very consciously also developed friendships, relationships, mentor-mentee equations with folks who have taught me quite a lot. So
Right.
that's really the context of our conversation this afternoon about learning and hyperlearning. So that's who I am, Rahul, and that's who I want to kind of build myself into every
Super.
day.
Super. As in, you've got an extremely illustrious career record, and there are multiple very, very prestigious roles that you have occupied over your career, and you've not just occupied these roles, but you've also straddled between different kinds of industries, and those have been conscious decisions. Can you share the thinking or the principles that you have when you're trying to make these tough decisions? Because I'm sure after 15 years straight in CPG, it is not an easy decision to make a jump and move closer to the digital side of the world, because there would be fears. And I'm sure a lot of people who are watching this, including myself, there are so many doubts when you want to make a big life decision, and it gets even more harder as you are more experienced and therefore more committed to a certain industry. So can you tell us about the thinking and the principles that kind of influenced your approach?
So Rahul, each one of us, I believe, have our own set of frameworks that we develop over time. For the
Right.
first 20 years of our lives, 25 years of our lives, maybe even till we are 30, we are largely playing a life script. And that script may or may not be written by us. It might be dictated by where we come from,
Right.
parental expectations, societal expectations, our own expectations, our conditioning, so on and so forth. But as I have grown in the number of years that I've spent on this planet, as well as the number of years that I have gained experience professionally, I think I've tried to simplify what I thought are useful framework for me. And it's a very simple principle or
Right.
set of principles, if you may. I think if you look at the way that I have tried to think about my life, the first has been to get a strong foundation in anything that I do. So in the specific case of my career, since you kind of told me that there are young people who are watching our conversation, my first kind of submission would be get a very strong foundation. Get a super strong foundation of skills, which are business skills, leadership skills, maybe working cross-culture, cross-category. And I think Unilever provided me with that opportunity and that privilege.
Right.
So my strong foundations are entirely owned from a business and a leadership perspective, are entirely from my mothership, which is Unilever.
Right.
The second principle that I work on is essentially in terms of figuring out, after you've got a strong foundation, figuring out what your individual script would be.
Right.
Because like I said, the first few years, you're playing somebody else's script. That's my own personal point of view.
Yeah.
Then you have to develop what is your own script. For me, the script was very clear that I wanted to learn more and more about the digital world. And that, like you very correctly said, involves a process of unlearning and relearning. And sometimes that learning journey might be very uncomfortable because you're exposed to new things, you're exposed to super smart people, you're exposed to things that you've never done before. And I think those are learning opportunities that I have actively sought out. I could have the comfort of being in one company, one industry, etc., etc. But my own life script, and like I said, everyone will have their own script, but my personal script is to keep learning and keep evolving, which brings me to point number 3, or principle number 3, if you may, which is that I believe that investment into self has the highest return on investment.
It's beautiful.
So I think I spend time in figuring out how can I be a little bit better today than I was yesterday. And then how can I be a little better tomorrow than I was today? And I think that principle holds me in great strength. And I think I'm able to grow every day because of that. And I would humbly urge everyone to reflect upon that. Because people often use the term compound interest when it comes to financial planning. And everyone knows what compound interest is, I'm assuming. But think about compound interest in your personal and professional growth. It's exactly the same. The results are exponential. The results don't get seen in the short term because it's, it's kind of building up slowly, gradually. But then over time, you see a very beautiful yield curve coming out. And I think I am in chase of that how can I be better every day so that exponentially I'm much better off than I started 10 years ago. So I think those are 3 principles that I've used to apply for my life in general. And they have played back into my professional career specifically.
Wonderful. I'm so glad we are having this conversation because, the investment into self in a long-term fashion so that there can be a little bit of incremental growth every single day. And you can see that compound interest being like phenomenally huge over time is something which is so core to most of the people who've really grown big in life. And I think it couldn't have been articulated better than what you did. So great. So the other thing which is, for outsiders, it's very hard to see the world or the life that you went through. So therefore, I would want to know, and I would love to share this with the the viewers as well, that which out of these roles challenged you the most, and I'm sure there are challenges in every single role, but there would be probably some that really stood out and made you sit back and reflect that, what is going on, and how did you overcome those challenges? If you can share a little bit about your journey. So we are still on your journey. So I'd want to finish this first because you don't always get an opportunity to speak to you every day.
No, that's absolutely, it's a fair question, but I will cut the answer in a little bit of a different way.
Right.
So, of course, I have had the privilege and the opportunity to work across challenging roles in Unilever, in Vodafone, in Facebook, in Games 24/7. And I think I've taken on a very interesting and challenging mandate at Pearson as well. And I think each one of these experiences have given me learnings, different set of learnings, but learnings across, and it's kind of built my muscle. It's built my stamina. So from Unilever, I have learned about how do you run a business sustainably? How do you run a business with talent that you grow every day? How do you run a business with purpose? I think there has been a tremendous set of learnings that I've had. And of course, Unilever has had a very foundational impact on my life and my thinking. From Vodafone, I have learned about looking at building a super strong team, which in a very challenging telecom environment could help our company and our brand stay strong and stay true to our consumer proposition. And I think by the end of the 3.5 years that I was there at Vodafone, I can confidently say that we had one of the best marketing teams in India. And that gives me deep pride, because those learnings that I got as a result of being with my team and helping our company were phenomenal and were invaluable. From Facebook, I was catapulted into the digital internet ecosystem of India. So huge set of learnings there, as also at Games 24/7. But now let's make it relevant to everyone who's listening in. What is important to me is that in each of these learnings, the denominator, the foundation, the most exciting part has been, and the most challenging part to your question, has been learning about myself. So I think every time my self-awareness journey has moved from level 1 to level 2 to level 3, I have found that I can perform better as a human being, as a leader, as a coach, as a business person who adds value to the business. And that all rests back on self-awareness. And that all rests back to knowing how to play to my strengths rather than worrying about anything else. So I think to me, since you asked which role has challenged me the most, I think the role of finding about myself. Who am I? What do I do best? What is my superpower? I think those are questions that have truly fascinated me. And I think I'm getting there in terms of understanding who am I, feeling comfortable with myself, and then really harnessing the strengths that I have honed over the years, instead of worrying about who thinks what, and what can I improve upon further, and etc. etc. I think the first part of the conversation that we spoke about is this constant need to grow every day, might be incrementally, but grow every day. And then the second part of your question and our conversation is about finding out who you are, what you do best. And I'm saying the provocative question of what's your superpower, and then bringing it to bear in the roles that you do in your life and in your professional life.
Wonderful. Wonderful. This is turning into a fabulous discussion. Okay, so now I can't wait to start the conversation around 52 red pills. So when I was doing my background research, I came across a beautiful, beautiful story around the origin of the idea of 52 red pills. And it would be lovely if you can share, the whole idea and even the name and, how it all came about.
So, Rahul, I know when we kind of first met, you talked about the fact that, you had ordered the book and then you'd kind of, done your research. And I hope some part of the book or some of the lessons in the book, etc., might be useful at a certain point in time. But for us, it began, and most of the credit for this, I only take credit for finding a good publisher, but most of the credit for this is with my wife, who was my kind of co-architect of this journey that we call the 52 Red Pills. So this basically began in December 2017. We are sitting in Kanha Forest Reserve, and we are talking about the fact that both my wife Eka and I are very avid learners. We love to read, we love to research, we love to write. We're very avid learners. And I think that's something that we have passed on to our teenage daughters as well. And we said that while we have learned could we put a little bit of a system to some of the things that we want to learn a little bit more on?
Yeah.
And we said that, can we look at learning also from a rich set of people that we know, first degree of connection?
Right.
And through that, we might meet other interesting people as well.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we wanted to put, both MBAs. So humne socha, let's put a little bit of a structure to it. Let's put an Excel sheet to it. And let's put a timeline to it. So ultimately, that conversation that began on a New Year's Eve in Kanha National Park in December 2017 became what we called a 52-week journey. So every week of 2018, and 52 weeks in a year, every week we picked up one topic and one expert who would help deep dive into that particular topic for us and help us understand that a little bit. So we walked away every week with some set of learnings that we would apply back to our daily lives. Obviously, this journey was not very deep. So it was more wide than it was deep.
Yeah.
But at least we got the starting points of inquiry in a lot of interesting topics that we had wanted to know more about in a structured way. So topics like, we wanted to know more about eating healthy or eating raw or eating organically. We spoke to the founder of Raw Pressery, Anuj, who's also a very good friend now. We wanted to know more about, and I come from the world originally from marketing. And so I wanted to know about creativity unlocks. And we managed to have a fascinating conversation with Piyush Pandey, who I think is one of the most creative people in the world.
Yeah.
Besides having a hat as, one of the top leaders at the Ogilvy network.
Right.
We managed to have a very good conversation on mental models with Kunal Shah, who's Free Charge and Cred founder.
Yeah.
So I think we had the opportunity and the privilege to meet a lot of people on this journey of 52 weeks and learn from them, as also our research into a lot of interesting topics that we had wanted to know.
Yeah.
Now, there is, of course, a little bit of a marketing gene in me, which said that what were we really doing for these 52 weeks? We were going down 52 rabbit holes, some deeper than the other.
Yeah.
And we said, what's one metaphor for that? And the metaphor for that occurred to me was, and since I'm a fan of Matrix, the movie, that the red pill or the blue pill, red pill signifying adventure, signifying something that you don't really know how it will turn out to be. So we've said 52 red pills, combine the two. And that's really what the amalgamation is, the title which you know. And I think it's just the respect of learning that we kind of went through this journey, created time for this journey.
Yeah.
And Rahul, what is fantastic is we got such an amazing set of people that, of course, we have a deeper relationship with.
Yeah.
But gratitude for the time that they spent with us, the attention that they gave to us, amazing. I cannot be, more grateful to have learned from about 52 very interesting people across this journey.
Right. That is so lovely. So the moment you're describing this, when the scene is set in Kanha in December, the first thing which pops in my head is that end of the year is typically the time of reflection for a lot of people. And it is the time when you are kind of, meditating over what really happened this year, what was my professional, personal journey like. And based on all of that understanding, you are trying to draw a plan as to how am I going to enrich my life for the following year. And you start making all of those plans.
Yes. And
in most cases, and I'm guilty of this as well, what happens is that when the year begins, the first week is amazing. You go for that run, you do that swim every morning, you make your food at home every day.
Yeah.
And then as week 2, week 3, week 4 happens, plans start breaking apart. And then, we start saying that, oh, life hits finally. And then, all these plans go out of the window. So I'm sure there are tons of struggles that you would have encountered because, there's a huge commitment of 52 experts that you're meeting. There's commitment on your part, commitment on their part. And keeping to this commitment while you are, while you have other responsibilities in life and you're working jointly with your wife, how did you manage that whole, the struggle? I'm sure there's a struggle behind this journey, this beautiful journey that has come out. There's a lot in the background which probably is not always articulated or not always known in public. So can you talk a little more about those struggles, and what kind of strategies did you apply to actually make it possible to see it through till the end?
Yeah. So I think, Rahul, since you're in this space of having these very interesting conversations, not only about the core discipline of marketing, but also about how people think, how people dive into insights, and so on and so forth. I think one of the things that we have learned over the years is that to-do lists don't win. Habits do, right? And so when we were thinking about this 52 weeks journey, there were a couple of things that we did which in hindsight really helped us, and I'll talk about three. The first thing that we did is that and that was my task to do, which is that I pulled out an entire Excel sheet with 63 topics that we wanted to kind of get into deeper into. So that was in the form of a long list, if you may. And against that, we mapped a lot of people that we knew who could help us understand those disciplines a little bit more. So, for example, there was one topic which was called how to be calm under pressure, how to perform under pressure. Because when we are not under pressure, we are all very nice human beings, right? Everybody is smiling, giving each other high fives, etc. It's only when you're under pressure that your training comes into play, that your muscle memory comes into play. And we wanted to know a little bit more about it. That's why people practice, right? So we wanted to know more about it. So rather than going to anybody else, we thought, let's deep dive for that particular topic and learn from people who perform under pressure every day. So for that particular topic, we had extensive conversations with a senior police official, an IPS officer. We had conversations with an athlete who represented India at international level. So there is massive amount of pressure, expectations, etc. And we had conversations with a retired defense general who's seen live battle, right? And we wanted to know from them, what are the things that they have seen in their lives, so that we could hyper learn from their journey. We could dig into their journey and kind of get those nuggets and those strands. So similarly, I created this whole list of 63 topics, and against that put various names. So when you do an exercise like that, Rahul, it's mouth-watering, the kind of conversations that you can have, the kind of learnings that you can have. So we started out with that. Of course, we knew that some of the conversations may or may not happen due to logistics lining up. And that's why we had a long list. The second thing that we did was we audited our time. How do we really spend our times on weekdays and weekends? And we created a sacrifice list of the things that we had to stop doing. So for the first half of 2018, I disconnected all the OTT subscriptions that I had. Because I'm a big content, junkie, and I really wanted to spend time on 52 Red Pills as opposed to watching the next great series. And so therefore, created time 2-3 hours every week in the middle of what is an already very active professional life for both Eka, my wife, and me. What is already time that we have committed to our teenage daughters, what is time we have committed to our family, to our friends, and so on and so forth. But we created that time audit and the sacrifice list, and what we will stop doing to create that delta 2-3 hours. And then the third thing, which is very interesting, Rahul, is that a few weeks into this journey, we kind of opened up our journey to the world on social media by posting on it on Facebook and Instagram and saying, hey, we are learning about this. And we found some fascinating set of nuggets. Here's what we've learned, and we'd like to share it with you. And that formed a community of people who started kind of cheering us on, number one. And then they also started giving us suggestions and connects into what are the people you could meet, what are the topics you could be perusing into. So I think that was fantastic. So we got a lot of push. It's almost like when you're running a 21K or a 42K, and there are people who are lined up on Marine Drive for that last stretch, and they're cheering you on that you have just that last, 2.5 kilometers to go. And that kind of gives you that little bit of extra nudge, that little bit of extra encouragement. So I think we got that. So those three things as a process really helped us sustain the 52-week journey.
Brilliant. Beautiful. Beautiful. In fact, this is exactly, this was one of the richest, aspects. And I could see, I was able to draw some parallels between your approach and, recently I've been reading Atomic Habits as well.
Yes.
And there also the emphasis is not on to-do lists, but on building systems which will lead to habits being followed by themselves. So great. So what's the counterintuitive or unusual advice that you normally give, or is there some very counterintuitive or unusual advice you love giving to people?
So Rahul, of course, I kind of share a lot of my learning in terms of my career, in terms of some of the books that I've written. I share a lot of book recommendations with my friends and my professional networks.
Yeah.
But if I have to think of, you said counterintuitive stroke unusual.
Yeah.
If I have to think of one thing which is my personal kind of, favorite unusual advice to give, is that I place a lot of emphasis, and this is unusual advice, right? So I'm bracketing under that category. I play a lot of emphasis on having comfortable shoes.
Okay.
It's as unusual as that. What does that mean? So I've had, the opportunity always to walk into office with shoes that are really comfortable. So I normally wear my Nike sneakers to office, right? And what that does for me, and you would have heard this phrase, in MBA textbooks about management by walking around and stuff like that. But what that does for me is that it gives me an access, and I'm also a long distance runner. We spoke about it in one of our introductory meetings. So I'm always on the move. So comfortable shoes, what it does for me is that I'm able to walk anywhere, to anybody's desk, to anybody's cabin. And some of the relationships that have got created just because I've not restricted myself to kind of being stationary or being mobile, because I've seen people walking in, all the formal shoes possible. Male, female, doesn't matter. But for me, the unusual advice is get really comfortable shoes, walk around a bit, go out and meet people. My finance business partners have been my biggest sources of strength and my biggest supporters when I was doing marketing jobs.
Right.
And that's helped me because, again, walking around, meeting people, developing those relationships really helps. So that would be my, little bit of an unusual off the cuff advice.
I can totally relate to that. In fact, I worked in two different organizations, one where the culture was a little more casual and it was okay to have wear sneakers in the workplace. And then the other environment where it was a little different and you had to, dress up in a certain way. And I actually noticed the difference in the kind of relationships that I was building, the kind of collaborations which were happening. There was a formal air in the way, interactions were happening. So great. So no one, I don't think anyone would ever point it out to the shoes. So great you did. Okay, so at this point, we are moving closer to the end of our questions. So I just wanted to let the audience know that in case you are watching it live and you have any questions, and you want to ask Siddharth something directly, this is a good time. Send your questions over, and we'll try and take a couple of questions in the end. Okay, so Siddharth, the next question is, the way you framed this topic, the art of hyperlearning. Usually it's the way I arrive at the topic is that, it's either me trying to come up with a topic or, me recommending a topic. But I don't always get a topic which has been framed by the speakers themselves. And the moment you mentioned the art of hyperlearning, I was sold. And, so I love this framing. And I really think your entire philosophy kind of aligns with it. So can you tell us a little more about this, art of hyperlearning, and what exactly is your philosophy behind it?
Yeah. So Rahul, we kind of spoke about some of the strands And kind of I'll connect some of those trends that we spoke about into your question now. So we spoke about learning every day and kind of growing every day, right? And the principle underlying that was the principle of compound interest, so compounding, if you may, over a period of time. So that's one. There is also this wonderful analogy that I'm sure everyone on this call has heard about, the bamboo shoots, right? That suddenly in 5 years, you're kind of seeing exponential growth coming through. So just Google bamboo shoots. You'll know what I'm talking about. So that's the first thing we spoke about. The second thing we spoke about is figuring out, and for me, the manifestation of that came about in 52 Red Pills, but figuring out really what's your learning framework, right? And the reason I spent time on 52 Red Pills is because for us, it was a learning framework which gave us wide, if not deep. Now, this year, or rather 2020 and 2021, we've gone deep into some of the things we learned in 2018. So that's the deep part of it. But the learning framework for 52 Red Pills was go wide on a variety of very interesting topics. So question, what is your individual learning framework from each one of us who are tuned in to our conversation? Because I think all of that flows to one fundamental question that we should be asking ourselves when we think about learning and hyper learning. And I'll talk about the differences between the two. So learning, I think, is things that we absorb on a daily basis, whether it is in life or our interpersonal relationships or professional kind of journeys, etc. So that's learning. You put yourself in certain situations and you will learn. You will solve certain problems and so on and so forth. So there is a learning. There is also this whole practice that you could put yourself into, where you are very consciously figuring out how to accelerate your learning. And that is what is kind of colloquially called hyper learning. And for us, if I take the example of 52 Red Pills, the way we accelerated our learning into hyper learning was figuring out how we could tap into the collective wisdom of people who know about those subjects. So sure, we can do our research in terms of reading books, reading white papers, going onto the internet, looking at YouTube videos, and so on and so forth. There's a wealth of resources which is available. But for us, the formula or the mantra to accelerate that learning and make it hyper learning was to figure out how we could match topics with experts who had that personal connection with us to give us insights, not just at a surface insight, but also correlated with their own learning journeys, their own life journeys. And so therefore, the immersion that we got in the 2 to 3 hours that we spent with each one of the experts was really a condensed form of their entire life journey and the nuggets that they had to share back with us. So I think the fundamental question I would urge everyone who's listening to us on this conversation is, what's your diet? And when I say what's your diet, it is not about what you eat alone, right? It is about what are the sources of information coming to you? What are your thoughts? How do you consume information, process it into useful learning, are able to then apply it back into your lives in terms of habits? I think that process then becomes beautiful and you grow every day. But I think it fundamentally starts with saying, do you recognize what's your diet? Do you have your individual learning framework? And if that learning framework in today's very fast moving world, if that learning framework can be a hyper learning framework, nothing like it. Because my submission is that things also change very fast. And at the same time, the benefit that we have is that we live in a digital world, which means that some of your learning resources can also be quite close to you, convenient for you. You might like to have a conversation which is on Zoom, that's fine. But you might also want to use a WhatsApp call to set up logistics for a face-to-face meeting. So harness technology to have real, meaningful conversations which help in your hyper learning. That was the way we did it for 52 Red Pills. But I think the 3 questions that I would urge everyone who's listening in, and goes back, Rahul, to your question about hyper learning and the principles. One, ask yourself, what's your diet? And and the diet is expanded way of what's kind of flowing into you as inputs. What are you soaking up? Question 1. Question 2, what is your individual learning framework? And then question 3 is, how do you know that you are learning and growing every day? So again, as an MBA and as a professional business leader, I have some core metrics that I am looking at to know that all of it is actually resulting into something which is meaningful. And that's deeply personal to me. And I'm sure each one of you can evolve some metric for yourself also to know that you are in the right direction. Or you have a guide or a friend or a mentor or an ally on the journey who's keeping you honest and keeping you on your path.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's beautiful. I think, and the way you've structured it all together, starting from having a process, implementing the process, and finally measuring your outcomes to make sure you're always on track. Great. So what are, I want to go back to the book because it's a fascinating read. What are some of the most magical lessons that someone who is, on the edge or who wants to make that purchase after this, listening to you over here, what are some of the most magical lessons that a reader can expect from 52 Red Pills?
So, Rahul, I think the way I personally look at 52 Red Pills is that it's a thali. It's like this very big, gorgeous Indian thali, and there are lots of things in it. And I'm assuming here that everyone will find their favorite. So for people who have a sweet tooth, they like, the kheer. For people who have a savory tooth, they might like the papad mixed with some, vegetables made in a certain way, and so on and so forth. I'm a big dal fan, so I might like the dal to extend the analogy. But I think 52 topics that are there in 52 Red Pills encompass quite a wide variety of human disciplines. Of course, the core promise is, how can I become healthier, wealthier, and a wiser version of myself? And so people might find joy in reading about how can I be more creative? How can I figure out a way to have a more healthier life? How can I have better relationships with friend and family? How can I aim at happiness, which a lot of people aim as, the ultimate measure of success. So there are many such interesting chapters. I think everyone will have their own favorites. But I think the whole piece about 52 Red Pills is, and I say this as a consumer of 52 Red Pills myself, that what are the 2 or 3 journeys that it starts you on? I think that's the most fascinating net end outcome that you will have if you were to read 52 Red Pills, because not everything will deeply resonate, but some things will. And those some things, can you take it deeper? So I'll give you my personal example. When we did 52 Red Pills, and of course we did 52 mini journeys or mini rabbit holes, but the one that has fascinated me the most personally, and if you ask Eka, my wife, the answer would be different for her. But the one that has fascinated me the most is the whole concept of Ayurveda. So I want to know more about Ayurveda. I'm right now doing a certification on Ayurveda. I'm reading a couple of books on Ayurveda. I want to meet a few doctors and kind of get first-hand knowledge. So I'm going a little deeper. The whole principle of Ayurveda is what people talk about in terms of meditation and mindfulness. People talk about in terms of the mind-body connection. People talk about in terms of breathing right, and so on and so forth. But it's beautiful. And for me, that's one of the outcomes that people can expect out of 52 Red Pills, the book, which is what is your internal deep dive that you might want to take into 2 or 3 topics after having read 52 different topics.
Beautiful. It's like a shortcut of, a year's effort that has gone into between you and your wife. It's a shortcut that is being served readily, and you can just go through it and save all of that time. But as in, the journey is definitely extremely precious. So you've dropped a lot of pearls of wisdom, but I think in my last question, I wanted you to kind of try and bring it together once again, that if you had to share a few strategies that will help our viewers embark on their own journey towards a healthier, wealthier, and wiser becoming a healthier, wealthier, and wiser person. This overall diet kind of a thing. So what are some of those strategies that you would like to recommend to them?
So Rahul, since you've asked me a little bit of a broad question, let me start with it in a broad way, because that's how I'm viewing my life these days.
Yeah.
The first thing, we, at a very macro level, we have about 30,000 days to live on this planet, right? Which corresponds to 80 years, which is the average life expectancy, which could, as the decades go, which could move to 100 years if medical science advances, and if we don't get struck down by some of the common killers, cancer and stuff like that, right? So if you look at your lifespan, which is between 80 and 100 years, the question really is, how do you make sure that you have health span which accompanies that lifespan?
Right.
So I'm thinking a lot about it these days. And I would urge each one of us to think about, because everyone thinks about life and careers and jobs and, how do I get success and so on and so forth. But at this point of time, since you asked me at a broad level, the first thing is, how do you make sure that you have health span, which means that you're healthy and you're active and you're brimming with energy.
Right.
What, Ayurveda calls prana.
Yeah.
Even when you are 60 and 70 and 80. So health span to accompany your lifespan.
Yeah.
And I'd really want folks who are listening to this, think about this when you're in your 30s, rather than to start thinking about it later in life, because it'll help you. So that's one. And I've started very broad.
Yeah.
Then the second piece, and we spoke about it earlier in the conversation, is I think it's very, very, very important for each one of us to have our personal philosophies, and underlying that personal philosophy for us to have a framework, and underlying that framework is to have a set of habits that support that framework.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at my case, since we are talking about some of my journeys, my philosophy is better every day, which is just make sure that you are incrementally growing, right?
Yeah.
Underlying that is a learning framework. And one of the manifestations of that we spoke about, which is 52 Red Pills, the book and the journey.
Yeah.
And underlying that are a set of habits that I have which support this. Yeah. So whether it is the habit of figuring out some unbroken time that I have, people call it flow, people call it, time banding and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Habit stacking, so that you get a lot done by making sure that you've stuck a couple of habits onto pre-existing habits. So things like these as habits which support your framework, which are linked to your life philosophy. So I think I would encourage everyone to think about that. And then finally, coming back to, since a lot of professionals will be listening in, coming back to saying that how can you make sure that you are kind of building your capabilities and your muscle on a daily basis, since we were talking about learning and hyper learning. And I think the three things that I spoke about, which I want to bring together again. One was figuring out how do you have a strong foundation, and you might take a couple of years to build that strong foundation. Be famous for one discipline that you're really good at. So one vertical that you go very deep and you are known for that. You're a industry expert at that. Let's put it like that. So get your foundation strong. B, look at the world that's emerging in the next 10 to 15 years time frame and say, what is it that you now want to play in terms of your personal life script and your professional life script? And that might be very different from how you thought about it when you had graduated MBA. And that's the evolution that I'm talking about. And then the third part is figure out who are the people who can help you on that journey. I think all of us have heard a lot about, and I'll talk about two things which have really, which have really stood out for me in my journey. One is, and when I talk about learning from people, right? One is this whole discipline that I learned from one of my friends, who has a couple of years kind of ahead of me in the professional experience. And he taught me that while everyone has to-do lists, how many of us actually have to-help lists also? And to-help lists are nothing but figuring out those daily acts of help that you can provide to people that you have worked with, people who you know, might benefit from a little bit of getting connected to each other and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So, which is not to kind of, spend your whole day doing it, but
Yeah.
consciously figure out how you can put some items on your to help list. So that's the first thing that has really helped me. And that's why I'm talking about. So some people might resonate with it, some people might not. That's fine.
Yeah.
The second thing that I think really helps is finding out in people who can mentor you in your initial parts of your journey, let's say in the first 15 years of your journey, if you may, or 10 years.
Yeah.
And also figuring out how you can pay it back through having mentees that you can share the relationship. Because as you mentor somebody, you learn a lot. And to me, what you learn the most is, and people have all sorts of mentors, reverse mentors for teaching them digital and this and that and all that. But I think that you learn the most is who are you? Goes back to self-awareness. Because I think self-awareness is a key unlock of personal growth, which leads to all kinds of growth, including professional growth.
Yeah.
So I think those are the three things that I would bring together for people who are tuned into our conversation, which would really, really help people think about learning and hyper learning in a way that is perhaps super beneficial to them.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. So we'll move on to the audience questions, but I couldn't help but, notice this while you were talking, that I was reading Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. It's one of those, cult pieces when it comes to strategy. And I think, while there are a ton of examples from the business and, the military world, but what you have done over here is you've applied the principles of creating powerful strategies, good strategy into your own life. There's a beautiful diagnosis and understanding yourself. There is a brilliant, guiding philosophy, which is the second stage, which should happen, and you have one. And then there are a coherent set of actions which you have translated in the form of, things that you do and habits that you have built to kind of make the strategy possible. So it's absolutely remarkable, while you were saying this, that not everyone thinks through their own life strategy. And you have just showed how they can actually do that. So great. So we'll quickly move on to the audience questions. We are kind of almost on, on the edge. So this is a question from Achal. It is said habits take about 60 days to form or break. That's what I have read. How do you ensure that what you really learn forms a habit that is positive and makes it sustained?
Golden question, Achal. There are certain things that I struggle with, which I want as daily habits, and certain things that I have been able to put back into my life, which have then become, daily habits. For example, for me, daily running is a little bit of a meditation for me that I must do, and so therefore I find time for it. I'm not really too sure where some of these numbers come from, that it takes 21 days and then 60 days, and then somebody also says 90 days, etc., etc. So I'm not too sure about whether there is a finite number that you can attach to it. It's a little bit like that, that 10,000 hour rule, but that 10,000 hour rule has many qualifications to it in terms of it being deliberate, in terms of it being, led by an expert instructor, and the fact that you have to measure progress and so on and so forth. So coming back, Anshul, to your question, I think three things have helped me personally in terms of incorporating habits into my life. The first thing we spoke about, which was habit stacking. So if there is something that I want to do, can I attach it to a pre-existing habit? So it kind of fits in neatly to something that I'm doing in my life every day. So the most recent example is that my wife over the last couple of months has been teaching me, especially in the lockdown pandemic months, has been teaching me meditation. So she's guided me through meditation. And I think one of the ways in which we have found to make it into a daily habit is to allocate a specific time to it, or a specific spot in the house to it. So then it has a better chance of transpiring when you can see, when you can visualize, when you wake up, that habit is happening when and where. So there is some amount of specificity to it. And I think we've been able to be moderately successful at sticking to that habit amidst all the distractions of our life. So that's point number one. Point number two of habit is figure out why that habit is keenly important to you, and that habit might have a better chance of succeeding in becoming a habit. So, for example, running for me has become a habit because I have been able to figure out what it does for me. So I can see that I'm mentally more alert. I can see that I have more physical energy flowing in my body after I come back from a run. And so therefore, I make sure that that habit sticks of running every day, whether it's a 5K or a 10K, right? On the other hand, I haven't been able to quite, just as yet, quite vividly describe the benefit of waking up early in the morning at 5:30 a.m. And so I've struggled with it. I know that there are certain benefits to it. I know I want to do it, but I've not been able to mentally visualize that as powerfully as I've been able to get into that frame of mind when it comes to my running. So I think that's the second thing that you maybe can think about when you're talking about habits. And then the third thing that really helps is if you find an ally that helps you in forming a new habit. I think it's invaluable. For me, running has succeeded as a long-term habit is because I've kind of found friends who run in the days that I don't necessarily might want to run, and so on and so forth. So find allies who can help you in terms of forming some of the habits that are most precious for you to form. So those are three considerations that I would have for you, Anchal. And thank you for the question.
Wonderful. Great. So the last question before we wrap up, this is actually an anonymous question from someone that was shared before we went live over email. So I won't call out the name of the person or any other details. But this gentleman is someone with 10 years of experience in the marketing industry and is struggling with mental health. And the pandemic period especially has been really difficult. And reading your book, that person was inspired to start changing his life, and he got excited by the framing of the topic itself, the art of hyper learning towards a healthier, wealthier, and wiser life. And what's the first thing that you would advise to this gentleman? Like, where does he start? Because the challenge really is not anything else apart from remaining sane and keeping going, and that's a real struggle. So what's your advice for him?
So the only advice, Rahul, that I can have is kind of built on my personal life experiences, than really being professionally trained to give such advice, right? So I can only give it as one human being to the other. And thank you for sharing that story. But the 2-3 things that I would say is, first is that, and I think all of us in somewhat way or the other over the last 1.5 years have maybe realized this just that little bit more, that life is precious, life is precious, right? And I think I can confidently say it for some of us or all of us that we have that much of more gratitude for it. So I think the first starting point for me would be that, look, if you're reasonably healthy, and if you have, air in your lungs, and if you can move around, that's gratitude. Let's kind of start with that. The second thing that I would say is that I have found deep amount of my personal growth as well as happiness in having deeply fulfilling friends and family who kind of support you in terms of your growth, but also in terms of just generally enjoying the sips of life, if you may. So if you have people who can kind of help you in that journey, I think that's a gift and a blessing. And if you can spend time with family and friends like that, I think I would advise that, as like I said, as one human being to the other. And the third thing is that, look, all of us have some space where we find our personal joy. So for example, my personal joy, apart from everything else, my friends, my family, my work, my personal joy is sitting alone with a good coffee and reading a good book. And that's my personal space. That's my personal joy, even if it is 15 minutes or half an hour in a busy day. And I kind of encourage you, if you're listening in, and Rahul, if you're kind of, cascading this message across, for us to find what gives us that personal joy, which is deeply specific to each one of us. It's very individual to each one of us. And I think that again can help us in terms of figuring out our wholesome health. Our mental and physical health is deeply interrelated, so it can figure out how we live a more wholesome life. Would be my submission.
Thank you so much, Sid. Okay, so there are people in the audience who want to thank you as well, for sharing your thoughts. And Achal also says thanks. So
Achal, Anup, thank you. I can see your comments here, so thank you so much.
Wonderful. So I'm sure there will be people later who would want to have questions. So we've put a couple of details, in the event description box, so people can reach out to you. But I think one of the things which I want to personally share with everyone before we close this event is that I think a great starting point for anyone who wants to really have a richer life is to get your copy of 52 Red Pills and give it a read. And then if you want to reach out to Sid and find out more, I think then you'll also be able to relate to everything that he's been talking about in this live stream in a lot more richer way. So on that note, Sid, thank you so much. I wish you the very best in your Pearson journey. It's a relatively recent move, but I'm wishing you and Pearson a lot of success. And thank you so much for making time, taking all these questions, and that too on a Saturday afternoon. So that's lovely of you. Thank you so much.
Fabulous. Thank you, Rahul, for having me here at this forum. And thank you for everyone who's invested time in listening to this conversation, either live or subsequently as Rahul cascades it across multiple fora. So thank you again, Rahul.
Awesome. So on that note, I would like to thank all the viewers, and I'll see you again in the next live stream. And do make sure to follow our social media pages so that you can stay updated with future events. So thanks a ton. Bye-bye, Sid.
Thank you. And thank you, Ramesh, for the comment that just came in. Indeed, it's a privilege and an opportunity to join Pearson. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.